waiting a couple. We're getting our ducks in a row, our recordings on, our Facebook Live. We'll start in a couple seconds. And thanks for being here. Right. I think everybody is in the room. We got the thumbs up. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name's Sarah Stans. I work with the Park County Environmental Council as the Director of Community Resiliency. We're thrilled to host another community conversation today. This conversation is part of an ongoing series where we discuss tools and community planning and strategies that really help us foster positive, smart, and inclusive growth, and growth that is determined by the public and members of our community for community benefit. So if you've missed conversations in the past and you want to revisit recording like this one, you can find them on our website. And we can pop that link into the chat as we go along. And you'll also get a follow-up email with the recording potentially. I'm going to do a quick introduction about PCEC, introduce you to our amazing and passionate AmeriCorps VISTA, who's leading a community resiliency planning process, and then we'll open it up to some conversation and Q&A. So just please keep your profile on mute if you're not speaking, be respectful of everyone. And if you have any questions, you can pop them in the chat and we'll keep an eye on it and try to answer them as they arise. Otherwise, at the end, there'll be plenty of time. As always, today's presentation is recorded, as you all got the message, and on Facebook Live. So hi out there to anyone on social media, if you're joining us today. So PCEC, a lot of you are probably familiar. We are your local community conversation group with 650 contributing members, over 3,000 supporting here in Park County alone. And we work with people to really safeguard the land, water, wildlife, and community. Forever. And let's see if we can make sure that doesn't happen again. We work with people just to protect land, water, wildlife, and communities in the Elson's Northern Gateway through grassroots organizing and advocacy. So Park County is located within the traditional homeland to many Indigenous people, including Cheyenne, Blackfeet, Absaloga, or the Crow tribe, and many other Indigenous nations who live here now and whose ancestors cared for and really love this place. Park County today has a long tradition of human habitation, of people who are deeply connected to this land and who love, cherish all species and steward this place. So we're committed to really working together and to honor this legacy in our work and for future generations. At its heart, resiliency really asks us to build community, to nurture our relationships, and to look after one another. Being a resilient community means it really takes all of us, and it's something that our community is really good at. At PCEC, we believe in taking care of one another and ensuring the people and all wildlife in our community thrive, which is very much central to our vision and mission. Some of this work, as you may be aware, is drought planning and mitigation, tree planting, flood preparedness, volunteer response, youth and conservation leadership, weed monitoring, active transportation, housing planning, and policy, all that benefits land, water, and wildlife. So to bolster this resilience work, I'm excited to introduce Katherine Fazekas, who most of you may have met and who started serving with the Park County Environmental Council through the Montana Campus Connect VISTA Resilience Cohort Program in August last year. So using the Montana Department of Commerce Montana Resilience Framework as a guide, the Resilience Cohort members, they meet communities where they are, they hold community conversations like this one around climate disruption, local challenges, and finding local solutions. So Katherine is a Massachusetts native with a background in chemistry and biochemistry and a passion for environmental science and activism. Her goal this year is to initiate a resilience plan, seeking input from you all, that will help Park County remain resilient in the face of a new climate reality, including rain on snow-driven flood events like we experienced last June, and to prolonged drought and wildfires. Katherine's work also rightly places importance on centering vulnerable, low-income populations, and as these people and wild creatures are most impacted by adverse climate events. And lastly is our delight that Katherine is the first Hayes Fellow. PCEC has been working with John Heike to create the Hayes Fellowship in memory of John's late wife, Barbara Hayes. And the Hayes Fellow will build and expand our conservation leadership program and help provide capacity to address our most complex problems. We're so honored and excited for Katherine's contribution to our community. It is a beginning to prepare Park County to face a lot of challenges, and we are lucky that with her partnership that we can start preparing for them today. All right, that's all I have. I'm going to pass the microphone to our friend and co-community resilience champion, Katherine. The floor is all yours.
Wow, thank you for that very kind intro, Sarah. I'm going to get some slides up here. See, does that look good? Okay, so first and foremost, well, thank you, Sarah, for the introduction, and thank you, each and every one of you, for joining today. I'm here to share about my work, what community resilience is, how it can look in Park County, and what I've been working on since joining here in August. And Kate French from the BlueGreen Alliance was kind enough to join today, and she is going to add on to how the resilience planning can help us tap into federal funding like the Infrastructure Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law that are available at the federal level right now. So as Sarah mentioned, I'm an AmeriCorps VISTA, and I'm hosted by the Montana Campus Compact, which is a partnership between many of the Montana universities and AmeriCorps to use education and higher education to help address community issues. The National Center for Appropriate Technology, NCAT, is also partnering in the work, and I'm hosted here at Park County. And so within the AmeriCorps group, I'm part of a resilience cohort, and there are 6 of us across the state, as you can see by this map, and I'm here in Park County, and I'm working on developing a community resilience campaign and plan. So the goal is to create the Park County Community Resilience Plan. What is this? It's a living, community developed and owned document that examines projected changes in weather patterns, identifies vulnerabilities within a variety of sectors, and lists action items that can allow Park County to thrive amidst a new climate reality. I hope that it will be operationalized by adopting it into the Park County and Livingston growth policies, which would then allow us to tap into federal funding available. So what is community resilience? Starting with the basics. So the definition of resilience I like to use is the capacity of individuals, communities, and systems to survive, adapt, and grow amidst stressors and shocks. And another good quote I like from the same source is to identify, assess, and adapt to social, economic, and ecological disruptions. And 2 key components of resilience are adaptation and mitigation. Adaptation involves adjusting to conditions that are faced, while mitigation means efforts to reduce or decrease the threat. And then I like this graphic here on the right of community resilience because it shows that it's not just ecological. A flood does not just address and threaten the floodplain. It can affect the mental health of people living in the floodplain who have to deal with repairing their home. And it can affect the economies of business owners who then lose profits because of the flood. And so what are we being resilient to? In this case, we are being resilient to climate. I have been basing all of my work so far off of the Greater Yellowstone Climate Assessment, which is done by the USGS and Montana State University as of 2021. So very, really good relevant sources and done very recently. And the GOICA, as it's abbreviated, shows the observed and projected changes in climate. So from 1950 to 2018, you can see that the temperature has warmed by 2.3 degrees Fahrenheit. There has been a 25% loss in snowfall, and the peak stream flow is 8 days earlier. And along with these observed changes, it also lists projected changes to the end of the century. And for people who are familiar with climate planning, there are different models that show different levels of severity based on mitigation efforts or not. And so I chose like the middle scenario to focus on, and this is with mitigation effort. It projects that temperatures will be 5.3 degrees warmer on average, a 9% increase in precipitation, 40% loss in snowfall, and 35% less runoff from June to August. So for those who are not very data minded, what does this look like in real life scenarios? More increased early season flooding followed by drought, decreased snowpack, which will impact snow and water-based tourism, heat wave and danger for those who don't have cool spaces to retreat to, increased chance of wildfire and associated decrease in air quality, and increased climate variability and unpredictability in general. And so this will definitely hit home to many members of our community, as we know that these impacts just led to a flood in June. And so what do we need to do? It's not good to focus on the doom and gloom of data and all that. So it's good to like focus on what action items are available. And so the GOICA says that the adaptation needs are to engage regional stakeholders on climate change for effective community planning, establish effective ways to share information from new scientific studies, and work with communities to identify local consequences of climate change, whether this is habitats, human health, economies that are most vulnerable to these changes. And not only is the need in this on a greater ecosystem scale, but local here in Livingston, our growth policy goal 4.1 and strategy 4.1.34 that Grant Gager just mentioned in a recent city hall meeting. A big city initiative right now is to develop a climate or energy plan in partnership with Park County. And then this is not only an effort that's happening in Livingston and Park County, it's happening across the state. As you can see, these are existing climate change plans that have been published or are in the works across the state. And I'm just going to quickly show you 2 examples of what a climate change adaptation plan can look like. This is the Blackfeet Climate Change Adaptation Plan. I think it's one of the strongest ones. They divide their plan into a number of management sectors that are both human or wildlife based. And they chose these sectors based on vulnerability, which is the susceptibility of a system from harm to climate impacts. So choosing who and what is most vulnerable to focus on as a high priority. And so they organized with each of these sectors, they introduced it, looked at the observed and expected impacts, assessed how confident they are that these impacts will happen, and then used a goal, strategy, action approach. So what is their goal for wildlife? How are they going to go about it? And what exactly are they going to do? And in addition, they assigned who's going to do it, partners, and funding sources. So I like their plan because it's very, very science-based and very specific down to like, where is the money coming from? However, they did have an outside consultant, which is a limiting factor. It's not yet known if we're going to be able to do that. So on the other hand, I like the Climate Ready Missoula plan. It's a very developed by a grassroots bottom-up approach. They had a number of stakeholders join for 2 workshops. The first one, they brainstormed and identified vulnerabilities. And the second one, they joined again and brainstormed solutions. The result was a document with 29 goals and 77 action items. And so here's an example of the goal on the left, or the sector rather on the left: business, rec, and tourism, the goals, and specific action items. And again, I think this is a more realistic example for Park County, where people just got together and were able to discuss and outline the goals. As you can see, it's not regulatory and not utterly specific, but just general community-based goals. And I'm going to hand it over to Kate to talk about the importance of creating a community resilience plan for federal funding.
All right, can you guys hear me okay? Okay, good, seeing a thumbs up here. Hi, everybody, my name is Kate French. I am the regional field organizer for the Rocky Mountain region, includes Montana, for the BlueGreen Alliance. So I do live in Livingston, and the BlueGreen Alliance, we are a national organization. It unites, it's a nonprofit organization. We unite labor unions and environmental organizations to solve today's largest environmental problems, well, in ways that create good jobs for and maintain good jobs in our communities. So we kind of have this phrase that we don't have to choose between a healthy, livable climate and good jobs and security. We can and must have both. So anyway, that's a little bit about BlueGreen Alliance. And I've met with Katherine to talk about a big focus of ours and of mine in particular in the region is making sure that our communities are benefiting as much as possible from the really innovative funding opportunities that are available within the bipartisan infrastructure law, but also and the Inflation Reduction Act. So you might have heard about these just massive funding bills that will be funding a lot of the needed repairs that we need, but also building up our country in a way to like launch us into a new clean economy future. So it's really good to see and break down what exactly a community like Livingston or Park County could be eligible for. And the reason that I wanted to bring it up here is because sometimes if you're developing a community resilience plan, it's in the past, I think it seemed really far-fetched to say, we're going to go after funding, to transform our vehicle fleet for the city. So it's all electric. Well, in the past, that might have been kind of a silly thing to say because it wasn't actually viable, but now it actually is viable. There's lots of money available. There's tax credits, there's grants available, and there is corresponding technical assistance that is mostly being provided by outside entities. So I just wanted to outline a few of the programs that I think should be of particular interest for our communities, for putting and incorporating into either the climate resilience plan itself, just to inform that, but also to think through that strategy moving forward to operationalize this plan, right? And what do you need? What ducks do you need to get in a row in order to start making sure that you're applying for funding for these programs? Also, really quickly, I also feel that it seems that, we have a lot of motivation and a lot of, we've got Katherine here to pull together a plan. So it is happening, but just in case you needed another reason to realize why a climate resilience plan is helpful, is that it really shows a level of commitment within a community to pursue certain changes, to pursue certain funding opportunities. And that is going to make any federal grant opportunity or program or grant application much more competitive within a federal agency. If they see that this is some goal that has been vetted by the community, where you have invested stakeholders, you have stakeholders who have been engaged in years prior. This doesn't feel like just something that's a one-off and something you thought of, you know, just because you saw a grant application, a funding opportunity announced, right? So this is a really great opportunity to align some interests, to identify some key stakeholders for any one of the elements that we're talking about here. So anyway, without further ado, I'll jump in a little bit. One of the things I think should be top of mind are the energy efficiency commercial buildings tax deductions. 179D, this is an IRA. This is tax credits for building retrofits for a nonprofit or a governmental applicant. This actually can be these tax credits can be direct pay, which means that you get the money up front instead of figuring it out later down the road. Very important for entities that do not pay taxes when it comes to actually getting a tax credit. Another really, really important one is the environmental and climate justice block grants. This is a big, I wouldn't say it's a slush fund, but it's a big pot of very, very flexible funding to invest into remediation and anything else that is, you know, if you have an area of your community, if there's a census tract that has experienced environmental degradation in a way that disproportionately impacts a certain community, and Livingston does actually qualify for that in certain areas, that then qualifies you for applying for certain projects. It's very, very open as long as your community fits within the definition. And of course, with the Superfund site being here, and we have a sizable low income population in Livingston specifically, that does make you eligible for this $3 billion pot of funding from the EPA. Another one I thought would be very, very applicable for us. And again, I'm only highlighting ones for which the community itself, like the local government, could be, or local governments, either county or city, could be applying for funds. The other one that I think is really, really fascinating or really interesting would be the Small and Disadvantaged Communities Grant Program, especially for emerging contaminants. And so I know in several small rural towns in the West, having one of the biggest expenses and one of the top needs is wastewater infrastructure. And so this is competitive funding, but it will be renewed. This is through the bipartisan infrastructure law funding. Some of those are running out a little bit quicker. Those funding opportunities expire sooner than the IRA funding. So that is one thing to keep in mind. If you want to go to the next page. This, I think, is really, really relevant looking at BRIC. This is the microgrids program, something you'll probably need to coordinate with the state, but I think that we have a lot of state support for resiliency during an emergency, especially after the floods we recently experienced. But one of the primary reasons I wanted to flag this is that microgrids can be a source of, or can be a project that could be funded with BRIC funds. And this is a microgrid is essentially solar panels and a storage or other sorts of energy storage whereby a center, a part of your community can operate off the grid if the grid fails. And I know that is becoming a greater and greater need within communities. And so that could be a top target, especially for community centers like a school or any other sort of public building that serves as an emergency shelter. The other one, this is like the other slush fund I mentioned. I shouldn't call them slush funds, but a very, very flexible pot of funding is the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. This is for smaller projects. Again, this could be used to fill any sort of gaps that you just don't see. There's a dedicated pot of federal funding available for community, that the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund really is that thing that a community can apply for. And then finally, I think one that's really novel is the Clean Heavy Duty Vehicles IRA grant program. So this is so you can have your heavy duty vehicles, maybe your bus or other vehicles and heavy duty fleet that the city or county operates, that they are owns, that they could have an EV version of this. Like I said, one of the biggest concerns is, what we call technical assistance, but also grant writing assistance for communities like yours, like ours, I guess I shouldn't say yours. I do a lot of presentations for communities I don't live in, but this is so different and exciting. But there are emerging and more resources available to help conduct the technical assistance analyses that you will probably need in order to apply for any sort of federal or state funding, frankly, to actually demonstrate the need as well as a program design or project design. Beyond that, there is also a pre-application prep work, especially for the water infrastructure that is currently available with the Rural Community Action Partnership. And there is the Rural Partnership Network that I would urge our community to apply for to be part of this pilot program that the USDA is launching in order to essentially equip local communities for applying for funds in the future. Montana was not designated, or none of our communities were designated as initial recipients of the pilot program funding, but it's a really great tool in order to establish us in a good position to apply for future funds. So I hope that's a bit of an overview of some of the top funds that I think could be really, really big opportunities for our community. So hope I didn't take too much time. Back to you, Catherine.
Wow, thank you, Kate. It's great because you can do all the plans in the world, but it is so much better to see that there's a possibility for the planning to making us more competitive for this funding that's available and create some real change. And so now that we've touched on kind of what resilience is and why it's important, I'm gonna go into how we go about making a plan, what I've been working on so far, and what is still left to do. So what I've been using as kind of my guide and my leader throughout my work so far has been the Montana Resilience Framework for Communities. This was put out by the Montana Department of Commerce, and it's essentially a stepwise guide for community organizing, because at the end of the day, my role is a community organizer. I am just coming into this community. I love it so much and plan to stay here, but at the end of the day, it's not my ideas. It's me getting together community members to make a plan for Park County by Park County. And so first is to start the community conversation, which I've been doing so far through events like this and through one-on-one personal interaction. Assemble a steering committee, engage the community to identify needs, assess vulnerabilities, evaluate existing plans, prioritize resilience needs, develop strategies, develop the plan, and implement it and assess it. And this is a lot of words, but essentially it boils down to look at the science, turn it into scenarios, engage the community, find who and what's vulnerable, and then create goals, strategies, and action items around who and what is vulnerable. And so my progress so far, I've been pretty much touching on steps 1 through 5. I wouldn't say that any of these are done. I think they all need to be ongoing, but that is what I've done so far. And so to start the conversation and engage the community, I began by holding stakeholder interviews and talking to people from areas of economy, environment, and social resilience. I've so far done about 40 interviews, and this has helped me to see who the key players are, what different issues are, and who to talk to and what to do next. Additionally, I've been assessing vulnerabilities on a more broader scale by seeing what are the shocks and stressors facing Montana, Park County, and Livingston through the existing literature that's out there, such as the Montana Climate Assessment, the Greater Yellowstone Climate Assessment that I talked on, and then Livingston specific documents such as the growth policy and public health demographics data and the Park County Housing Needs Assessment. And then from these, I've been trying to see what the vulnerabilities are from who I've talked to so far. And from a pilot community cafe, I've been hearing that some of the biggest shocks and stressors are floodplain, river health, wildfire preparation, relationships, housing, wildlife, and that the people who are going to be most vulnerable involve wildlife, young people, people with health issues. I've examined a number of existing community plans like the growth policy, the hazard mitigation, the CHIP, and trails and active transportation plan, kind of seeing what's already published out there on resilience and trying not to duplicate existing efforts. And then something I've been working on so far, but still is an ongoing effort, is assembling a steering committee. It's essentially a champion in each area of business, elected officials, agriculture, etc. And then the plan for going forward is to continue to engage the community through continuing interviews, hosting a community conversation for today. And then I'd like to engage the public by holding community cafes. And then in order to go forwards on plan formation, I hope to have the stakeholders I've interviewed get together for a workshop, as Missoula did, and then gather public input to make a draft plan, and then again bring that to the public for input. And yes, again, developing the plan and assessing vulnerabilities will be done through the steering committee, forming working groups with stakeholders within their sectors, hosting a workshop where we brainstorm vulnerabilities and solutions, whether this is one or two, is yet to be determined. And then getting input from community cafes and from all the above, drafting a plan of all the vulnerabilities and solutions that are identified. And then the last step, implementing and assessing. We hope, again, as we said early on, to operationalize this plan through the growth policy. And then this could lead to further actions such as an advisory board, etc. It's just an option that other communities have done. And then I like this graphic from the Blackfeet plan that shows that this implementation and assessing is an ongoing process as we are planning for the future and we don't know exactly what will happen. And so this is a living plan that will be changed as we continue to go. And so the next step I hope to take with this work is to bring it more public and get community input for a community resilience plan that only makes sense. And I hope to do this through the format of a community cafe. This kind of follows the World Cafe style, where we'll have a public event and ask questions on the values of Park County, the vulnerabilities, what a resilient community would look like. And I hope to have these all around the county to increase accessibility for people living in different parts of the counties. And so this method is just really a way to foster dialogue, get feedback, and then identify people who are perhaps interested in taking a larger role in this planning process. So that's all I have to say. I hope that has an update on kind of the importance of resilience and how I'm going to go about doing it. Now I'd like to open it up to discussion. I have some questions since the next step is community cafes specific to that, but I'm also open to other questions. So please, I'd love your input.
Well, thank you, Katherine. It's really amazing how much you've done in your short time here. And I mean, I have a question. I know we work very closely together, but I wanted to open it up first. So we're a small enough group that if people want to just pop on and unmute, you're welcome to do that, and I invite you to do so. Or even share a reflection. It doesn't have to be a question.
I have a question. Katherine, I'm wondering if you could share just kind of an anecdote about, what the conversations you've been having look like, when you sit down with community members to talk about, like, kind of what are the things that you're hearing? Are they the same? Are they different? What kind of responses are you getting from folks?
Sure. I would say I'm just amazed by how much people always open up and are so just frank with me. It's like, okay, I've never met you before, reached out of the blue saying I'm here doing work, and people have been so receptive. And it leads to some really honest conversation. And to get to your question, I've been hearing just a genuine love for this county, love for this area, and some of the concerns I've been hearing around that are just division, and a desire for more social cohesion, which kind of goes into that social resilience aspect we touched on earlier. Um, and then in terms of ecological threats, living with a river and how to go about that, concerns for wildfire and drought, um, but a desire, a love for this place, and the desire to overcome all of those stated issues.
Hey, Katherine, it's Christina from Yellowstone Park. Thanks for the presentation to you and Sarah and Katie. That was fantastic. Great work that you've done in a short amount of time. You mentioned, I think I'm most interested in the vulnerabilities that you're seeing. So you mentioned you identified where we as a community are the most vulnerable to future climate events. And you talked about, I think, relationships, floodplains, housing. You listed a few of those. Can you expand a little bit, as you've been kind of immersed in this world and thinking about this for the past couple of months? Where do you think we specifically as a community are the most vulnerable, and where would you like to see us focus most of our attention moving forward? Thanks.
Yeah, I would say we are most vulnerable when dealing with those, and we are most vulnerable with having a population that has low income individuals, and we are one of the last intact ecosystems, so that the wildlife is very vulnerable to all of these issues we're dealing with. So I would say those are the two areas. But again, like, in order to make this plan, to make the solutions, you have to identify problems and I wouldn't say problems, but vulnerabilities. And so I think that I am really just trying to collect the community's idea of vulnerabilities, but that is what I've been hearing so far. Thanks, Christina.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a suggestion.
Please, yes.
This is, I think this was pretty remarkable presentation. And thanks to both of you, all of you. And I would encourage you to seek out ways. I know I see some names and faces of people who are in positions within the county or within the city. And it would seem to make some sense to me to see about the possibility of getting this presentation before the planning boards or even the commissions, if you will, of the county and the city of Livingston. That I don't mean that as anything that precludes or stands before the community cafes, which I think getting to the grassroots is the way to do it. And I know there are other people like Kate Stewart, who I don't know if she's still on here or not. Yeah, she is. That, you know, trying to do these similar types of things with different variables, but getting out and getting the opportunities for people who often feel as though their voices are not being heard, to get them into the whole thing. And I'm guessing that you will find that the vast majority of the people, the vast majority of the time, vastly, vehemently agree on things. So, and sometimes it feels like people think they don't agree, but I respectfully disagree with that. Something to think about, Catherine.
Yeah,
I think you and Kate have really done some outstanding things here, and the opportunity of, maybe thinking about ways of getting new monies into help with this is really useful too, so people can see results. So it's not just more echo chamber feeling to people. Thanks again.
totally. And thank you, John. You've been supportive and helpful throughout this entire process as a mentor. So I appreciate that. But yeah, those are excellent ideas.
Kate Stewart, I saw you pop off. Why don't you, or pop on, sorry. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, Catherine, I'm so impressed with this presentation. You've done a fantastic job, and you've taken such a broad view. I'm really pleased that you're doing this work and working with PCEC on this. It's fantastic, and that you have the support of people like John, and I'm sure there are many in the community that would really get behind you. I'm curious. So the community engagement work that I'm working on, it really isn't that data-based. Certainly there are best practices, and we're doing our best to kind of filter those best practices in from around the county. The difference is with the subject matter that you're working with, it really is very data-based, isn't it? So, there are the projections, there are, in other words, getting a group of people together who have a feeling or a perspective or opinion about what should be done is fine, but if it's not consistent with what the data show to be really important, it may not be that effective. So I'm just curious, how are you addressing that challenge? Will you make the data available to people in these community cafes, or how are you going to go about doing that?
Yeah, that is a great question. The way I've so far tried going about that is similar to in this presentation, converting that data into scenarios that speak to people, specifically in Park County, which honestly the Greater Yellowstone Climate Assessment does itself, is it shows the data for that people who data appeals to, but it also has straight up in more, in plain language, what this data looks like kind of in impacts to different areas like wildfire, like agriculture. And so I've been going through to pull out those sentences that speak to what is important in Park County, and to make it available to people. I have like an infographic that I've prepared that has those scenarios on it. And so I would, at a community cafe, distribute that. And so even though it is data-based and, it is most effective to address those solutions, it's also important to think on the human factor. Like, we need solutions that work for us. And I think that if you had a scientist just be like, well, this is what you're going to do, and like, this is how you fix this exact problem, this exact database problem, that solution might not work in reality for our community. So even though it's like, okay, we might not hit it to a T, I think it's better to make a community-based solution that can work than to just have nothing at all. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, and I really appreciate that. Thank you, Catherine.
You're welcome.
Jim, do you have a question?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Catherine and Tara. My name is Jim Berg. I've been doing energy efficient buildings in the area since the 70s. And I just thought I'd like to build a little bit on what Kate was bringing up. And I'm appreciating Catherine's presentation to kind of create kind of a overstructure of her or how we might get at some of these issues. But I'm a kind of a nuts and bolts guy, and I would like to maybe suggest something that we can do pretty practically here in our community. You know, we know that the largest climate crisis facing us, environmental crisis, is climate. The UN Climate Committee periodically puts out increasingly dire warnings. We've known for the last 15 years that we're going to have any hope of staying within a 1.5 degrees climate rise. We've got to reduce our fossil fuel use by 80 or 90%. And so that means everybody's got to do that. And we know that rich people use way more energy than poor people do. So I do think it's incumbent on us in this community to take responsibility for that. And what I would like to suggest is that we, as a way to get at that, how we all individually can reduce our energy use, is that we need to track it. In other words, it's pretty easy to know how much natural gas we use in our house, how much electricity we use in our house, how many gallons of gas we use in our vehicles, how many ski trips we take or flights to vacation. All of that kind of stuff is easily trackable. And so I've just found it useful that if we set kind of a baseline of how much we're using now, and we know that we have to reduce our fossil fuel use by 80 or 90%, we can track that. And I guess what I'm fearing is that ideas and plans and hopes and dreams are all well and good, but we do need the numbers to make sure that what we are doing is actually having the effect that needs to happen. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Totally. Yes. And that's a good suggestion. Something that I didn't touch on is that the city does have at that baseline, a baseline greenhouse gas assessment. So we can, after, look at that to see where we should focus areas and then develop solutions and can track it against that baseline to see exactly how much greenhouse gases are being reduced. But that is a very good suggestion that everyone can do, and doesn't really require any extra work or any regulation, just individual work there. Thanks, Jim.
Another question for Kate. I was looking at that slide about funding available, and Kate, I know we've talked about it, but it's just so good to be reminded and see it. It seems like there's a lot of opportunities. So I kind of have two questions. There was the one that the name of the resources, I can't remember what that one was called. I feel like the acronym was a bad acronym like crap or something. I don't think it's the community resilient REIS anyways, but I'm curious if anybody in our community is exploring that right now, and if you have deadlines on that, because that seems like a really relevant kind of first step. And then the other thing I wanted to flag for you and for anybody else, you know, that the community of Cook City is in dire need of help with their wastewater treatment plant. And I saw that funding pile was available. And I'm guessing that they've talked about that, but I'm curious if, wanted to make sure you knew about that, or if anybody is reaching out to them with some of these tools as well. The funding tools.
It's so the one that I know is immediately available and has been recommended to me, and I've met with them, with some of their national folks already, is the rural community. Oh, is it rural? It's RCAP.
Okay.
Rural,
crap.
yeah. So I
Yep.
can send that out. Let me just, and then there's the rural. So that one's immediately available. And they are an authorized financial institution lender. Anyway, they are authorized by the EPA and by a couple of the offices within USDA to help communities apply for and get funding, essentially for specific programs, you know. And one of those that they've been operating for a long time has been their wastewater and wastewater treatment and rural water needs program. So really, as far as I understand, I haven't gone through the process, but they are a very, very helpful entity to help a community access funding for any EPA drinking water program, any rural community. So I'll put them in the chat. And then longer term, I do think that it would be worthwhile to see if the community can get some assistance with the Rural Partnership Network. Again, that's something the USDA is piloting, and it's been very successful in some other areas to help bring more capacity resources into certain communities, because that's been really the big hang up. There's so much funding available, and yet a small community like ours has limited capacity for applying for funds, right? And then managing those funds afterwards. And so just getting on top of that ball early is really, really important. And as much as possible, I do think that that's an important thing to bring into the planning process. Like, how, if you are going to go after a lot of these funds and manage projects, who's responsible for that, right? And that means you have to add more people, you know, and bring on capacity. That's a pretty important high priority, I would say. So I don't know if that helps. And yeah.
No, thank you. That's exactly, it's all this money available, but you know, where do we have grant writing capacity? You know, so that's super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to my question kind of falls in line with that question, Kate, is with the toolbox full of financial options and grants and additional funding, do you predominantly see that it has to come from nonprofits, through partnerships, government organizations, or what is the mix there? I'm thinking forward and who we need to start having conversations with.
I think that there's so much available. I think it just depends on which ones you want to go after. But by and large, I would say that a local community is a local government is going to be your primary applicant for most of the funding that you likely are going to be pursuing. In certain cases, a nonprofit is the primary applicant, but in any case, what we're seeing is that a partnership is probably your strongest applicant of all, right? And so that's usually a good way to go about it. I would say the other one to really engage early, if you can, are any of the utilities, because so much of this is based on energy and like water utility, but also electricity. And so to the extent that if you have relationships with Northwestern, but also the Rural Electric Co-op, your Park County Electric Co-op, those would be those might be some really good entities to partner with early. So if that's helpful.
Yeah, that is really helpful. And just because this is a community conversation, you know, as we're all aware, that is the one area where we lack capacity, and kind of both local government, county, city, is that grant writing, and where the county might have, you know, more of a dedicated person. In the aftermath of a flood, her resources are pretty tied up with recovery, right? And so if you're having these compounding events, there's very little room to expand, to prepare for, and you know, and further our work in resilience. So I just wanted to add that kind of anecdote of it's a bit of a chicken and egg. And so I think the additional capacity for grant writing is one of the most exciting things I've heard. So thanks, Kate.
Yeah, and I would say, I know it's the last thing is, if you do have any philanthropic organization or you know, individuals who want to donate to an effort, it doesn't sound as sexy as a lot of other things, but providing some of that grant writing, the capacity for grant writing is so key, and really is that catalyst to making sure the community can access more funds. So just throwing that out there, that doesn't seem as exciting as like buying some solar panels, but ultimately will help you buy many solar panels in the end.
Yeah, that is the hard part about fundraising, is making it sexy. Anybody else have questions, comments, reflections? We have a couple minutes left. Any bit of input helps really frame how this work goes forward, and we really take it to heart as we're going to be continuing this work year after year in partnership with the AmeriCorps VISTA program.
And Sarah, to add on to your question that you just had there, yeah, a big part of the VISTA program and the VISTA's role is capacity building. That is the largest part. And so VISTAs can serve for grant writing, either if that's me or the next VISTA. That's definitely something that is within the VISTA's role.
In fact, let's end on a really happy congratulatory note. Katherine helped Livingston Healthcare apply for funding to improve the trail out there, and they were successful. So we're already seeing Katherine working in partnership to help other entities in our community raise funds, and that was, you know, for active transportation and trails. Yay. Thank you, Katherine, for all you're doing. Sarah, Kate, thank you, all of you, and for everybody for attending.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Katherine, you've certainly built capacity, and this community conversation is a result of that. So thank you for herding us all. It's 1 o'clock. We're going to honor the time. Thanks for taking some time to spend with us, and we appreciate you all. See you at the next one.